Welcome to another photography vlog. In this one we're going to be shooting some film in low light in Seoul, South Korea using one of my favorite cameras, the XPan. Shooting film at night is a challenge to begin with, but especially with the XPan because it doesn't have any fast lenses. The fastest lens is f4. Is a real challenge shooting this camera in low light. I never liked using a tripod for this kind of photography because I do street photography, and using this camera in low light has always been quite a challenge that I've been struggling to figure out how to do consistently and easily, but I think I finally figured out a way. But first, also I want to show you a couple of photos that I took during the daytime because that is when I began the roll, and I think I got a couple of decent shots there as well. As I wake up, and let's just pretend it is the actual morning time and not like 1 PM, I open the window and I see rain, and that of course makes me happy. So it's time to load up the XPan with some Cinestill and head out the door. To be honest, this day I was quite tired, I wasn't really feeling it, but I wanted to basically force myself to go out anyways. I took a couple photos with the Ricoh to start getting into the zone, and once I saw this cute little neon sign of this squid, I pulled out the XPan and started taking some photos of the alleys. To be honest, in these first few photos there's not that much depth and they're not super interesting, maybe for that reason. Right now I'm somewhere in Jongno and there's a lot of these mechanics workshop kind of places with a lot of details. Usually I go for more minimal photos, but at least there's a lot of little details to look at in these photos. You can see from the highlights I'm also using a Pro Mist. Was it the best choice for this shoot? I'm not sure. And also because it is so dark inside of these shops and it's raining, it's basically already low light photography despite it being daytime. I'm holding my hands very still in order to reduce any shake because I'm very slow in the shutter speeds already. And then I found some interesting light. So apparently it's a whole alley of lighting shops, or a whole street. Basically a whole area. I guess it's pretty cool. Or as the kids would say, I guess it's pretty lit. One thing I learned from my last shoot with the Cinestill is you need a lot of light. That's a lot of light, alright. I'm just trying to keep that in mind. I'm waiting for a subject. I think the different details from the different lamps are quite cool in this shot. Okay, the audio here was too bad, but I'm basically complaining because my XPan has ran out of battery just as I was about to take the best photo of all time ever. So unfortunately I had to continue shooting on this day with the Ricoh. I'm gonna share those photos in a future video. After this I went to buy more batteries and continued on another day during the nighttime. I would say my hands are fairly steady, but I was always unsure just how slow I could push the shutter speed on this camera without IBIS. So in order to solve my issue with taking low light photos with this camera without having to use a tripod, it was time to experiment just how slow I could push the shutter speed. This first photo is with 1/15th of a second, and surprisingly when I got the photos back, it's actually sharp. I haven't shaken one bit. It looks very noisy, but this day was extremely polluted, which added noise to both film and digital photos. And also it was really terrible to breathe. But luckily a couple hours later that night it started to rain, which washed away most of the pollution and of course also provided some really beautiful scenes to photograph. Even though it was also extremely windy and cold by this point, maybe 4 degrees Celsius and very tough winds, but I was still enjoying every second. A little bit unpleasant. Yep. Now when it comes to trying to shoot film at night, there's of course a big difference between being in a city with a lot of artificial light and being in the middle of nowhere pointing the camera up at the galaxy. Obviously the latter is going to be impossible, but here in these conditions my light meter was giving me a reading between 1/10th of a second to 1/50th of a second. 1/50th of a second is not going to be a problem at all, but the lower you go, the more nervous it makes you. You gotta be really still to pull off something like 1/10th of a second shutter speed without getting any camera shake. And of course also another thing is if your subjects move with such low shutter speeds, you're not going to be able to freeze them. So if you don't want any blurry trails of people in your photos, which might be fine and work at some points, but if you want to freeze people and still get a good exposure, one of the best places to shoot are obviously areas where people do not move much. For example, bus stops or crossings. And these photos at the crossing are between 1/8 of a second to 1/15 of a second. You can see the last photo especially definitely has some motion blur, and we're right at the edge of the limit. I wouldn't go lower than 1/10 of a second, to be honest. 1/15 of a second already had enough light, so that is the exposure that I would choose. Unfortunately though, the composition, I thought it would look better than it actually does in the end. Right next to this crossing there was a bus stop. I've probably taken millions of photos at bus stops, okay, maybe thousands, but they're such photogenic places full of different possibilities for compositions that I just keep getting drawn into them. In this one we're trying to catch the wet surfaces, the subjects in the middle, trying to backlight some of the subjects with the lights from the bus whenever it shows up. It's pretty difficult to time it correctly, and again we're using anywhere from 1/8 to 1/15 of a second shutter speed. I did not mark down because it's just too much going on and I have bad organizational skills anyways. But in some of these it's actually almost overexposed, although that makes the editing easier because I did add a little bit of contrast or pulled down the exposure for a couple of these, and it is a little bit difficult to guess how you want to expose Cinestill in a situation like this with a lot of bright highlights, but I'm quite happy with the results. Especially this shot ended up being my favorite photo on film that I have taken so far because I just love the composition, and something I did not notice until getting the scans back, the negative space between the couple there forms a heart, and I just find that very poetic, a very nice coincidence. And just to show you a little bit of what exactly I edited, because Cinestill is a cinema film, it tends to be easier to edit. I don't know if I made that up or it's a fact, but really some of these were a little bit overexposed, so I've pulled down the exposure and added some contrast or pulled down the highlights, and occasionally played with the temperature a little bit. I don't do my own scanning, so I don't know how much is in the negative and how much is color corrected by the lab and how much I'm color correcting the lab's color corrections. I definitely want to get a scanning setup of my own at some point. Either way, I'm quite happy with especially shots at the bus stop, and I'm also excited because now I'll be more confident shooting this camera at nighttime in the future as well. So it actually was surprisingly easy to go low shutter speeds with this film camera. I thought it would be more difficult, or I thought the results would be shakier because I've only shot slow handheld shutter speeds with cameras with IBIS before. Definitely if you have a film camera with a more violent mechanical shutter, that is going to be more difficult than something that with a, I don't know, a kinder shutter. I don't know how to explain, I don't know what the correct term for that is. I didn't use any kind of a special trick to shoot these handheld, other than just, you know, trying to minimize movement, holding it with two hands, then subtly pressing the shutter. I've heard some people suggest using, for example, the strap and then tensing it. That's probably gonna be helpful, or some sort of a weight, or even a monopod would possibly be a much easier solution than a tripod. I literally just thought of that now. I would say shooting film at night is definitely a little bit more delicate than shooting film in the daytime. During the daytime, I pretty much shoot in auto mode. I don't pay as much attention to the settings as I do at night. At night, I definitely go full manual and be very careful about everything. And also I think especially Cinestill and cinema films, most films really tend to look better when they're exposed for the shadows, meaning sometimes you're gonna overexpose the highlights, but that's usually a better look than going underexposed or pushing color film. Doesn't tend to work that well in my experience, although it is still very limited experience, so take everything that I say with a little bit of a grain of salt. In other news, unfortunately, I had to leave Korea for now. I'm definitely gonna go back next year. You guys probably won't notice that I've left because I have at least 2 months worth of material that still needs to be edited. So hopefully I'll have enough material to last me until I go back. So definitely more to come. If you like this video, leave it a like and a comment, enable the bell notifications, and I'll see you next time.